Conversations, How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time, was born 5 years ago today. And today's presentation is called 10 More Lessons from 10,000 More Conversations. The original working title of the book was 10 Lessons from 10,000 Conversations. And here I am 5 years later. And what I realize is I've learned a lot more from the next 10,000. My agenda is the following. I want to start by talking about why I am talking about conversations, why I'm leading a conversation about conversations. I'm going to review the 10 lessons from the first 10,000 conversations as a platform and foundation for sharing with you 10 more lessons. And then finally, I'm going to conclude with my vision for what's next. I'm going to start with a picture of a goldfish in a goldfish bowl. And I want to ask everybody participating to write in the chat kind of what their thoughts are is why would Ivan start with a goldfish in the goldfish bowl? Because I'm wondering that myself. All right, I've got the first answer. People are trapped by the limitations of their communication skills. That's a pretty good answer. Because he's a creative guy, an allegory for the allegory of the cave. That's interesting. And a metaphor for observing others. I love those answers. Oh, it takes two to have a conversation. We can't do it alone. By sharing your vision, you look for encouragement and support, holding you accountable. Yeah, those are all really good answers. And that's why I was excited to ask this, because I have a different interpretation and everybody has a different interpretation. Here's my interpretation. We are swimming in a world of conversations. If you ask a goldfish if they're in water, a goldfish doesn't think I'm in water. That's just where they are. You could ask a human, where are you? What are you swimming in? Or what are you walking in? They might say, I'm walking in air. But I don't believe that. I believe we are walking in a conversation. And that conversation is either with others or it's with ourselves. But we're always in a conversation. Always. I have 5 key suppositions that I believe are behind the importance of conversation. Supposition number 1, conversations are how we get what we need and want in the world. We're not getting married without conversations. We're not in friendships or relationships without conversations. We don't have jobs without conversations. So our very livelihood depends on conversations. Supposition number 2, conversations are the building blocks of our relationships. We build our relationships one conversation at a time by building blocks. Not only that, our conversations are the foundations for all of our endeavors. Imagine building a building without a conversation. Imagine building a company without a conversation. Imagine doing anything worthwhile without a conversation. You could, in theory, build things on your own, and people do. But if you want to build something great, it requires others. It requires relationships and conversations with others. Supposition number 4, the ability to manage and lead a conversation is at the root of all the success you have in your life. And supposition number 5, better conversations will lead to a better world. I wrote the book based on the lessons of 10,000 conversations, the lessons of 25 years in business. And what I found was that I was frustrated, not by most of my conversations, but it was typically 1 in 10 conversations frustrated me. It left me doubtful that I had the ability to do my job at the highest level, because ultimately, as a relationship manager, all I do is have conversations. The sum of what I do as a relationship manager, working with the 105 families that I'm responsible for shepherding, is all based on conversations. This year, I've had 944 conversations with clients. And every single one of them is important. Every single one. Clients are retained by the conversations that I have. That's the profitability and the lifeblood of any business, is the conversations that both customers, clients, and prospects have with the people that they're dealing with at the companies. It was pretty stressful for me, especially 1 in 10 conversations was stressful. So not all of them. I still have stressful conversations and overwhelm. Like the idea that I'm having these conversations, that I'm being managed by the success of my conversations, and certainly problematic conversations are overwhelming. But by writing the book, I saw what was possible. It was possible that you could be confident. You could be poised. You could feel accomplished and have a sense of pride. And you could be whelmed. Now, whelmed is a word that I made up, but I think should exist. I wasn't overwhelmed, not underwhelmed, just whelmed, because still, even though I have skills that I didn't have many years ago with conversations, I'm still whelmed by them. I'm not underwhelmed or overwhelmed. I'm still whelmed. What I realized is the path forward to being effective in conversations is really 5 things. 1, going through the stages of competence, from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. And what I've found is that it's really important to embrace my incompetence. I am as incompetent with conversations now as I was in terms of my awareness and understanding as I was then. In fact, I'm actually more aware of my incompetence now. 27 years ago, my manager said, "You're really great, and I'm going to enroll you in the Dale Carnegie course." And I started to become aware of my incompetence there. What is key next is, if you're making mistakes, is to fix them. Like, to become a better conversationalist is to realize the mistakes you're making. And because we're swimming around in water like a goldfish, we're not paying attention to the water and the mistakes we're making. The game changer for me was adopting a process based on the 10,000 conversations. Whether you call it a process, a methodology, a rationale, a framework, I use that in every conversation. I got coaching. I've had actually 3 tremendous mentors, and then you have to practice. 10 lessons from 10,000 conversations. I stand by these lessons, even as I'm about to introduce you to 10 additional lessons. They are: build rapport, use questions skillfully, listen, exercise self-control, and satisfy needs. And if you're looking for a way to remember them, if you jump to the R here and you say RULES, you've got rules. And these are definitely Ivan's rules for conversations. When I don't follow my rules, my conversations don't work well. The next 5 of the 10 lessons: prepare and plan, create, learn, explore, address, resolve, and gain agreement for action. And again, if you're looking for an acronym or mnemonic device, you've got CLEAR, clear. And I definitely espouse a clear model for conversations. All right, lesson 1, build rapport. I have found that systematically gathering information is really important. And the things that I tend to gather are someone's educational background, their career background, their hobbies and interests, and probably most importantly, their family situation. I find that with my clients, I need to know all those things and build from there. I always make a rapport sandwich, which means my conversations begin and end with rapport, always rapport. And then matching people's verbal and nonverbal communication and supporting and adapting their style preferences. So for instance, if someone's a visual person and says, "I see what you mean," which I don't know how people see what is meant, but they're visual. So I might say, "Yeah, here's what it looks like to me." If someone is an external processor, I may say, "Go ahead," and I might really let them talk. Very important. Lesson 2, use questions skillfully. Questions are, without a doubt, the most important conversational tool. Being very intentional about the type of questions you ask, fundamental. So there are two major types of questions that I write about in this chapter. There's open-ended questions and there's closed-ended questions. And they are as different as opening a window and closing a window are. My unscientific anecdotal study is that 80% of the questions or more that are asked in our society are closed-ended questions. The game changer for me is when I became intentional and I started using open-ended questions to do what they're meant to do, which is control a conversation, create a dialogue. Closed-ended questions, it's not that there isn't a function and utility for them. They confirm things. They confirm acceptance of ideas. But it's the combination and sequence of open-ended and closed-ended questions that's fundamental. I never enter a conversation anymore without a comprehensive strategy for the questions I'm going to be asking. Lesson 3, listen. People often ask me, what's the best way to become a better listener? And it's without a doubt to stop your bad listening habits. What is the worst bad listening habit? It's interrupting. And there's all sorts of studies that show men interrupt women more frequently than women interrupting men. And that the higher you go in an organization, the more that people feel the right and privilege to interrupt. I spend a lot of time using one of the 14 ways that I write about in my book to stop myself from interrupting. Lately, this week, I've been going like this. This is not one of the 14 ways, but this works. This is the 15th way. One of the 14 ways is this. Another one of the 14 ways is pen to my mouth, or here's one of the good ways. Drinking, or being a Rodin sculpture. I listen with an intention in mind. I might write it down, listen for emotions, listen for thoughts, listen to collaborate. And then I can't believe that we don't teach this anywhere, but basic active listening techniques, they go a tremendous way to having effective conversations. And then constantly monitoring a balance between listening and talking. I call it the 3 zones of listening. There's zone 1 where you're doing all the talking. That's where the great majority of people wind up in. I mean, if they're doing most of the talking, then someone else is being dominated. Zone 3 is when you are being dominated. It's kind of like zone 1, you're the teacher. You're doing all the talking. Zone 3, you're the student, like all of you are here in this today, but by design, it's a lecture. Zone 2 is a balance and where most conversations can be to be most effective. Now, I have changed my thinking. I used to think somewhere between a balance of 30% talking and 70% talking is right, and maybe 50-50. More and more, as I become a more effective relationship manager, I'm only talking 20 to 30% of the time. I learned this from my mentor in my 20s, that the person listening is the one who's in control, not the person talking. Lesson 4, satisfy needs. In business, most of the conversations revolve around topics when there are needs being obscured by the topics. I'm in financial services. People call up. What do you think of the future? What do you think that's going to happen in the election? What do you think about interest rates? But behind all of those needs are obscured and hidden. And what's so is you can have a very effective conversation about topics, very effective, and never deal with what people need. And below all that is what human beings need. And one of the psychology principles that I espouse most predominantly is from Abraham Maslow and his motivational model, or his pyramid of needs. And I could and love to and have done episodes on Maslow's pyramid of needs and the motivation, from lower level needs of psychology and safety, physiology, to higher level needs of esteem and self-actualizations and transcendence. Lesson 5, exercise self-control. People have very little self-control. And when I see that you don't have self-control, then you can't use questions skillfully. You're not listening. You're not focused on maintaining and building rapport. This image here is of the person kind of in a Zen pose, maybe a Jedi pose, with people yelling around him. But we are in a cacophony of conversations. We deal with upset people, we deal with emotional people. And the important thing is to be the eye of the hurricane. Now, part of exercise and self-control is getting feedback. And whether that's feedback from a mentor or a coach, or that's even giving yourself feedback, you are the director of your conversations. One of the concepts in chapter 5 of the book is a conversation remote control, where there's times to just let it play. There's times to hit stop. There's times to rewind and go back. And there's times to fast forward. Lesson 6, prepare and plan. I'm going into a conversation prepared with talking points and questions. I have a whole repertoire of stories and metaphors and analogies. And that helps because I've been in financial services for 30 years. So there really isn't something I don't think that I haven't talked about already. And I have all sorts of tools in my toolbox that I don't start with, but I can use, and I'm prepared to do that. And then having a structure, and this is really a key to the second half of the book, the clear model. And I have a picture of from Karate Kid from the 80s version of Karate Kid of Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san. And there's, of course, the famous scene where he's telling him to wax on and wax off. Then after Daniel-san is sore, he says, now I need you to, he hands him a paintbrush. He says, I need you to paint the fence. And then I need you to paint the floor. And why I've included this is because a conversation model that I have at the time was called create, explore, address, resolve. And now it's create and learn, express, address, resolve. But it's being facile and so much that the muscle memory of my conversation model leads to the success that I've had. Lesson 7. This is that first part of the clear model is creating. I always make an opening statement. And one of my mentors taught me to state a reason or purpose for the call. Sometimes I do that after the bread, the first piece of bread in the rapport sandwich. Other times I make the statement and then I do the bread, the first piece of bread in the rapport sandwich. But I want to get the other person talking as soon as possible. That allows me to read the defense. That allows me to know if somebody is closed or open to the conversation, if they're willing to engage or unwilling to engage, if they're open or what I call Heisman Trophy. If you think of the Heisman Trophy, the person has the ball close to their chest and they have their hand out. Many people are keeping you at a distance. They are being Heisman Trophy. I've got to read the defense. I always use a consultative opener and I always check for acceptance of the agenda I've put forth. All of these techniques allow you to start a conversation in a very powerful way. A metaphor I use in my book is that of getting a start in a swimming race. There's 2 ways to start. You could start getting a push off the wall, or you could start by not being near the wall and you just start, you have no momentum. Creating a conversation, you have momentum, especially if you use these strategies. Lesson 8, explore. Now, the earlier part on using questions skillfully is simply between using open and closed-ended questions. In lesson 8, in chapter 8, I talk about 9 types of open-ended questions and 5 types of closed-ended questions. I now call them calibrated questions, and I've started doing training on them, and they're as different as, now I'm not a dentist or a dental hygienist, but when I think about using probes in a fine-tooth way, I'm sure a dentist could tell us what these different tools do. But when I'm probing in a conversation, I'm using very, very particular tools. Lesson 9, address. Now, when you're representing a business, you have to be able to present features and benefits. And I have not really found anyone consistently doing that. Like, what are the features of the products or services you offer? And what are the benefits? I don't see people doing that. I want to teach people how to do that. I also don't really see people discussing solutions on multiple levels. Like, there's the need, but then there's the need underneath the need. And then there's the need underneath the need underneath the need, like getting into a lot of depth. That kind of depth really is important. And then finally, having a process for handling the 5 types of objections. I remember the 5 types of generic objections with the acronym DIMES, which are drawbacks, indifference, misunderstandings, excuses, and skepticism. And I can and will do a whole podcast on that and training on that. I have a picture of John F. Kennedy giving an address, and I use the word address versus the word answer because people try to answer questions, but when you are a leader in conversations, you're speaking formally to their question, but you're not necessarily answering their question. And the reason why is because most questions, and I'm specifically speaking about clients and prospects, they're not formulated correctly. They're not going to lead where you need to go. And I'm pointing like JFK and saying, here's where we need to go. Because as a conversation leader and manager, I'm the leader. I'm responsible for addressing it, not necessarily answering it in the client's point of view, because they're not necessarily formulating the question properly. Again, it's not that I won't address their question, but I'm going to speak to and address what's important, which is their needs. And then the 10th lesson is resolving and gaining agreement for action. And so I want to focus on the word resolve at first, which is I'm solving people's problems. So I'm addressing their needs. I'm addressing their objections as well as their objectives. And I'm solving problems. Like I become really valuable to my clients to the degree that I'm solving their problems. But guess what? You don't just solve problems once and then you're done. You have to really re-solve people's problems. You have to bring resolution to it. So that word resolve has many meanings for me. But I also need to gain agreement for action. My theory is that all conversations are dependent upon some kind of action. So think, for example, if you go out to eat and you sit there and you look at the menu and you talk to the waiter or waitress and you never order anything, you never take any action. So many of the conversations that we have in our world, no action comes out to it. Salespeople have had a sales conversation, nobody buys because there's no agreement. Or people avoid a conversation because they're afraid of the word no. By the way, I'm very much afraid of the word no, but I've written a book and my book says no is a natural response. There's a metaphor I use of the conversation red zone, where your conversation moves up and down the field, up and down the field. But when you get to the red zone, the defense, when the person has to either spend money or commit time or their defenses go up, people often wind up on different sides of the table, or sometimes I refer to that as different sides of the net. Like you're having this conversation, you hit the ball, they hit the ball. You hit the ball, they hit the ball. It's almost like a serial monologue where people aren't really listening. My metaphor or analogy for a conversation is that of beach volleyball, 2-on-2 beach volleyball. I'm on the same side of the net as my client. I have a strategy I call bump, set, spike, where someone says something, I do active listening, I bump it up in the air, I set it for the client, and then before I spike, I've done bump and set. And then finally, I never had the language for agreement, for like asking people to agree. And there's 5 really basic words that I talk about in the book that I will share with you right now that really help you to just, in a very non-threatening, consultative way, gain agreement for action, or not agreement, but in a very comfortable way. People are all awkward. I know that was awkward when I had to ask a girl out to the prom in high school. I was so awkward. All I needed was these 5 words. And now the mnemonic device that I use to remember these 5 words is IRS PR. And I am able to remember that because the IRS always needs PR. Invite, request, recommend, suggest, and propose. All right. 10 more lessons. So because I still stand behind those 10 lessons as much as I did when I finished the book, I still use them every day. The 10 more lessons are built directly off of those 10 lessons. Lesson 11 is empathize. I've learned a lot about empathy over time. I've had 27 clients die. Not that I'm good at killing my clients, but I work with older people. And so in the course of 16 years, I've lost, a few clients each year. When someone tells you that they've lost their significant other or close family member, empathy is so important. Lesson 12 is built off of lesson 2, use questions skillfully. It goes way beyond knowing when to use an open-ended question versus a closed-ended question. It's a chess match. And I've talked a lot about that over time, but I've become more and more clear that using questions strategically, not just skillfully, but strategically, is of paramount importance. And I do a lot of mentoring and coaching in my company. I have formally mentored 30 people in the last 16 and a half years. I've done what I call conversation labs all year. I've spoken this year to about 1,000 of my colleagues. And what I've learned, not just that empathy is important one-on-one, but using questions skillfully. And many times we role play difficult situations, and it becomes very obvious to me and to them that I'm not playing conversational checkers. I'm playing conversational chess. But it's not because I want to pat myself on the back. It's because I've made thousands of mistakes. I mean, if I've had about 50,000 conversations in my career, I've made probably 49,000 mistakes. And so I've learned, not because I'm so great, but because I haven't been great. I've become conscious of my incompetence, which has helped me to become consciously competent. Well, lesson 3 is listen. Lesson 13 is just listen more. I found this guy on a picture on the internet of a guy with just enormous ears and but a straight face. And as I said earlier, zone 2 is where I thought you need to be, somewhere between 30% listening and 70% listening. And I really think it's probably more like 20 to 30% talking and 70 to 80% listening. Lesson 14 is built on lesson 4 of exercise self-control, exercise self-discipline. The way I look at this is you have to exercise control in each and every conversation, but you have to exercise self-discipline on the entire process, the first 10 lessons, and really thinking about your entire day as how can I be disciplined to maximize the value? If you're only going to have 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe as many as 12 meaningful conversations in a day, then having the discipline to approach those with all the skill and practice that you have is just of paramount importance. Lesson 15, well, lesson 5 was satisfy needs. Lesson 15 is collaborate. In lesson 5 in the book, I really focus on what you can do as a relationship manager to satisfy your client, your prospect, or your colleagues' needs. It's very much a one-way. I don't think about it that way as much at all now. I think about it as collaborating with the other person to satisfy their needs. Because you can't really satisfy someone's needs if they don't want you to. If you're not skilled in conversation leadership and management. So it's very much a collaborative process. I'm much more of a consultant than I ever was before. As I get more skilled and I do more reps, it's not that I don't want to satisfy people's needs, because that's my job. If I don't satisfy their needs, someone else will. If you can't always get what you want, you find someone that you get what you need, to quote the Rolling Stones. And then before I move off this slide, I have to quote one of my other inspirations, who said, stop, collaborate, and listen. ICE is back with a brand new invention. That's funny to the people who know Vanilla Ice, like I know Vanilla Ice. Lesson 6 was prepare and plan, and lesson 16 is engineer. Like, prepare and plan is for each individual conversation. I always have a plan. And even if that plan is just to know that I'm going to be committed to my conversation model, I always have a plan. Engineer the entire relationship inside of that conversation. Like, where does that conversation fit in? Where am I in the relationship? Now, I work in financial services. I've been guiding people on building wealth now for 30 years. And I get bored of that, quite frankly, because also my clients have a lot of money. My clients on average have $6 million. They no longer need to build wealth. What I needed to do for them, though, and what we need to do in relationships, is engineer the future. build the building, build the house for me to live with them. I don't live with all my clients, but the house that they need to live in for me and my career financially, but whatever you do in your career, the house for people to live in or the building for them to live in. If you're B2B, it's probably an office building, metaphorically speaking. So I'm now engineering or architecting where the relationship is going, and I'm doing that based on conversations. Lesson 7 was create. Lesson 17 is choreograph. Now, I'm not a good dancer, one shape or form, but it is really impressive when the Rockettes, or I don't know what this is from, but when people are coordinating, and that's what I'm visioning for conversations, is that you as the conversation leader and manager, it is a choreography. It is a dance that you're taking people on. And it's like magic. They match you, you match them. You're moving together. Explore is also really important. Lesson 8. It's really fundamental, like the ability to address people's objections and objections without exploring their needs is almost impossible. But I want to go further now, and that is to map. Lesson 18, map. And what I have here is a map. I think this may be from Tolkien, but what's important about the map I selected is that it's not full. It's not fully fleshed out. And exploring needs and situations and circumstances in a conversation. But what really makes me of value to my clients, and my average client has been with my company for 14 years. 14 years. What's really important is I'm always exploring and I'm mapping out their world. Like I can contribute to someone to the degree that I can have a full map, not just for me, but for them. It is of incredible use and value to help someone else know their own world. We don't know our own worlds. We have what we often refer to as squid on our face. We're like, we don't see what is stopping us. There's a lot stopping us and we don't see it. So when you hold up a mirror or you hold up a map to somebody, you really help them. Lesson 9 is address. Lesson 19 is influence. On our Farber farm, we have 3 ducks, and they're amazing to watch. When you influence somebody, they follow you. And I know that based on the understanding that my clients have of my philosophy and leadership in the world, they're just following me like ducks. Now, I could go more into, and I would love to go more into an influence because I've learned a lot about it over the last few years, but influence is lesson 19. Lesson 10 was resolve. Lesson 20 is transform. I'm solving problems. I'm resolving problems. I'm coming up with some kind of action. The result of a conversation when 2 people come together, it's not just 1 + 1. A chemical reaction happens and there's a transformation of that relationship. You know, when I have a conversation with Dr. Shad Helmstetter, and what leads into that is 2 years of listening to positive self-talk on my phone and then losing 36 pounds in 2 years. Or when I have Coach Rob Mack, a happiness coach on my podcast, and I am now 11 months later, much happier person because I learned that. Conversations transform our world. We all impact people, all of us. All right, here's the 10 lessons side by side. First 10 lessons: build rapport, use questions skillfully, listen, exercise self-control, satisfy needs, prepare and plan, create, learn and explore, address, resolve and gain agreement for action. And then my 10 new lessons. By the way, you are the first people to hear and see these 10 lessons. So never before seen lessons. Empathize, use questions strategically, listen more, exercise self-discipline, collaborate, engineer, choreograph, map, influence, transform. And this absolutely could be book 2, the 10 lessons for the next 10,000 conversations. Okay, I want to tell you about what's next. What's become clear to me as I've been teaching this is that some lessons have to be experienced in order to be learned. Conversations are like that. You can read my book 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, but you won't necessarily learn the lesson. It's like you could learn how to ride a bike by watching other people or reading how to ride a bike. You could potentially, but mostly you have to get on the bike. And what's stopping people is that we do all have conversations, but because there's very few role models for conversations, there's very little in the way of instruction for conversations. We're walking around following role models who might not be that good. I mean, most conversations are not very good. We're engaging in conversations ourselves without the self-awareness. I mean, when you start to be recorded, when you start to have people observe you, I mean, like I will observe people's conversations and I have to be kind to them because I could just blow them out of the water, like all the things they're missing. And again, it's not because I'm someone who's, I mean, I have some natural gift of gab and conversations, but mostly I've learned this because I've made thousands of mistakes and I'm still making them. But I could devastate people when I coach them because there's so many things they don't realize they're doing that are hurting them. So the innovation that I've had this year is Conversation Lab, and I'm up to Conversation Lab 35. And basically it's group coaching. I present a concept like most recently, the behavior change stairway model, which is a concept that comes from the FBI and negotiating with terrorists, but it's completely applicable to every single conversation. It's what led me to the idea of influence as being a key factor, because the whole behavior change stairway model starts with active listening, then empathy, then rapport, then gaining influence for change. The mnemonic device I use is allergic, active listening, empathy, rapport, gaining influence for change. And so what I'm doing with these labs is I'm having my colleagues and people, and what I'm calling students, with me in the lab and teach them the distinction and concept and then role play it, because I don't know how you can actually learn these lessons without experiencing them. Which leads me to tell you what's next. My role model here for the rest of my life is Dale Carnegie. The Dale Carnegie principles are fantastic. Living them has really impacted my entire career. However, what one of my book reviewers said, I believe to be true, which is what is missing is a micro how to do each and every conversation. And that's why I wrote How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time. But I'm not stopping there. I am building Conversations Academy. And I envision it as like the Dale Carnegie course. It is an academy that's different, though. Instead of meeting at the local YMCA or the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, where Dale Carnegie got people to get together after work or during their lunch hour, what we're doing right now is how Conversations Academy will be delivered. I'm setting aside every Saturday morning for the foreseeable future to build Conversations Academy. I'm going to start with Conversation Labs. I'm going to do lectures as well. And then what I want to launch is a course. And then the distinction academy versus the distinction course is it will become an academy when it's not just me teaching the core curriculum, but bringing in some of the people I've had on my podcast, people like Brian Ahern, who talked about and is an expert on influence, people who talk about relationship building, negotiations, persuasive ability. I mean, you could go on and on. Alex and I have brainstormed. We did an episode about a year and a half ago called 23 Courses That Should Be Taught in College. And there are just so many courses. The ability to what Dale Carnegie did to teach people at night or during their lunch hour was great. It was groundbreaking at the time. But what we need to do is a combination of synchronous and asynchronous delivery of material so that people can learn on Saturday mornings or evenings, but also have access to a course catalog and a hybrid. So my vision is that starting on Saturdays with labs and lectures, leading to courses, and then ultimately bringing in other people. And I want to end with the goldfish again. I'd like to invite you to write in the chat any interpretations you have about these goldfish. All right, I've got finding a way to stand out among the crowd. I like that. Marty said, with our conversation knowledge, we can leap ahead. I love it. I love that, Marty. And Lawrence, to the goldfish, the bowl is their world. That one steps up and jumps forward, but is still in another bowl. There's always another bowl. I love that, Lawrence. And then my mom, always someone to expand the boundaries of limitations. With that, thank you for being a part of this conversation about conversations.